doing that, I was face to face with it. It was holding me by my throat, and it felt like it was sucking something out of me.
I probably should have been more scared than I was when I witnessed the exorcism.
I turned and looked on my right side. When I did, there's a beam on the side of the tree, a large beam. It's looking at me and I'm looking at it.
After I hit the lock button and looked back up, I saw red eyes staring back at me.
That they're going to show multiple gods all over the earth, be able to speak in people's languages, and at that point, it kind of converge into this one entity, which will be revealed as extraterrestrial. You'll realize that aliens are the gods of old, and at that point, it'll wipe religion out of the context of humanity.
No, it couldn't have been a person, I know that. I know that people can't run through the woods like that.
So this thing comes into view, and I see it. It's 50 yards away from me. It's walking on two legs. It's huge. This is a big, hairy looking being.
Welcome. I'm your host, and this is Uncomfortable. Welcome back to the show. I am your host, Eric Szilagyi. If you've had an uncomfortable experience and you'd like to have it featured on the show, please get a hold of me at contact.uncomfortable@gmail.com. Please make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram, both at Uncomfortable Podcast 65. And most importantly, please share the show with others and make sure to leave us a 5-star rating and review where you can. This is the main way that you can help in getting the show out in front of other people. And with more people listening, that means more great stories coming for you, like tonight. There are a couple of events coming up that I'm going to be a part of. I want to run over these real quick. First, the second annual Bigfoot Brews held in Dowagiac, Michigan this September 9th. This year, Robert Kreider from New Mexico and Mr. Stacy Brown Jr. from Florida will be the main speakers for the day. Tickets are available now. Seating is limited, so if you're interested, I would suggest picking those up as soon as possible. Also, the Friday night before at the same venue, we are going to be holding a VIP dinner. And during that dinner, you will be able to spend time with both of the speakers, myself, and after the dinner, we are going to have a screening of Stacy Brown's latest installment of the Skunk Ape Experiment. So, both gentlemen will be on hand for the dinner, and then afterwards, we're going to view the 4 episodes. I think they're 30 minutes apiece, and that's off his newest project that's not released yet. Tickets are on sale now. I'm looking for vendors, so if you're interested, please check out the vendor ticket on the Eventbrite link in the show notes below this episode. Also, if you're interested in helping sponsor the event, please contact me at contact.uncomfortable@gmail.com. Just about a month later in October, on the 6th, 7th, and 8th, that whole weekend, you'll be able to join myself, Justin and Jay from the Cryptids of the Corn, Steve and Kyle from the Hollow Sky podcast, Chris and Joel from To Kill a Mockingbird podcast, Ryan, Justin, and Lance from the Appalachian Intelligence podcast, and Bo Kennedy from the Bump podcast, all at the first 40 in Airwaves podcast conference. Ladies and gentlemen, $50 is the cost of this ticket per person. That gets you access to all of us all 3 days. Starting the evening of the 6th, we're going to have a Friday night meet and greet with an impromptu panel in the courtyard at the Inn in Ada, Ohio. Starting bright and early Saturday morning, you will have access to all of the show's vendor tables where you can pick up your t-shirts, stickers, other merch from your favorite podcast. And that whole day will be filled with each of these podcasts taking the stage to do their thing for about an hour with Q&As. The host, the MC for the day, is going to be the lovely JJ Rose 777. So that's an exciting addition to our lineup as well. Then Sunday morning, just down the road, we're going to head over before you get on the road to take off for home, and we're going to provide you with a pancake and coffee breakfast. Just a way for us to say thank you for spending your weekend with us. Again, that's $50. That gets you admission to all 3 days. There will be a link tree in the show notes below. It has all the information there for the conference center, the special pricing for rooms, as well as alternative lodging options. This is a one-of-a-kind opportunity for you, the listeners, to hang out with us and just get weird all weekend. If you've not heard yet, Uncomfortable Patreon has launched, and I am very excited about it. It's the only place you'll be able to view my video series, Uncomfortable Afterthoughts and A Little Uncomfortable. Go to patreon.com/uncomfortablepodcast770 and see if any of the tiers there interest you. Your support for the show has been amazing, and hopefully this is a nice way for me to give back. The link tree for the the link for the Patreon and the Uncomfortable Discord will be in the show notes below as well. As for tonight's guest, Mr. Charles Stevens joins us from British Columbia, and Charles has some. He's got some Bigfoot experience that he's going to share with us. But then he's going to talk about some things that it has led him on the path in a somewhat unique field to try and discover an unusual method of communication between these things. If you're ready for it, let's get into it. If you will, please give a warm, uncomfortable welcome to Charles Stevens. Charles, welcome to Uncomfortable.
Hi, Eric. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Sorry about that long intro, but got to take care of paying the bills. So, listen, you joined the Discord here not too long ago, and for that, thank you. It's a pleasure having you with us. And I came across a post that you made, and it struck me, and I saw a couple of people who had responded to you, and I contacted them, kind of asked what they knew about you, and it's pretty interesting stuff. So before we get into all of that, you've had some experiences, and I assume that that's kind of what kind of put you on the path of trying to decipher the code of trying to find these things or find out what makes them tick, what makes them do the things they do, and how they do the things they do. So, if you will, let's get into it, man.
Right. So, my experience started, I was in a hunting area that me and my dad hunt, and this is a very steep hillside that benches off a couple times. So, the plateau starts off in a cut block, goes down the hill in heavily wooded area, and along each of the top of these benches is a white-tailed deer trail. And my goal was to go down there in the off season and set up a trail camera and see what kind of deer we're moving through. So I knew bears can smell the batteries in trail cameras, so I put this trail camera rather high in the tree, about 7.5 feet up, and I put a wedge behind it to angle it down towards the ground. You know, that way I can actually see what's moving along the trail. And I left it out there for about a month or so, and I came back to get it, and it was gone. The strap was still hanging on the bark of the tree, but the buckle had been completely snapped. And so I started getting angry, thinking someone stole my trail camera. And I did a search pattern circling out away from the tree. And about 20 yards away, there was a fallen over tree. And right beside this tree, there was my trail camera. But the latches to get into the case of the camera had been unlatched, and it was sitting facing the sky. And I noticed right away there was no teeth or claw marks, and my ST card was still there, so I didn't really think it was a human that did this, but it didn't really seem like an animal did it either. So, you know, that kind of raised my suspicions that maybe, you know, joked with my friend that was with me, what if this was a Bigfoot?
So
And-
let me jump in here real quick. Now you're in British Columbia. I know that can be a rather wilderness area. And what type of I know you have bear up there, but typically what are you seeing when it comes to bear? You know, what's
mostly black bear.
Black bear, and what's the average size, height wise, weight wise, when they're standing on their hind legs? How tall are they? Could they have reached?
They get to be about like 6 feet standing on their hinds. You know, it's a risky running a trail camera out around here. There's lots of bears. I get them on trail camera all the time. But I've never had one mess with the camera like that.
So when you retrieve the SD card out of that, were there any photographs that had snapped because of the motion of the camera being taken from the tree?
There was, but there was only a tuft of hair in the corner of the lens, like as if an arm had reached around from behind the tree, grabbed the case, and pulled it forward. So there was 4 anomalous shots, and then the rest of the shots were of sky. So it didn't really capture anything substantial, unfortunately.
But it's interesting, you know, you say if you looked at it and you examined it well, and there's no overt signs of claw marks or teeth marks, yet it was open, that's somewhat telling in itself.
Yeah, I mean, you need fingers to get into that. There's just no way around it. I mean, if you tried to break your way into it without doing the latches first, you're just going to snap the case.
Is that a commonly known area for hunting? Is that someplace that you, throughout the years, you've had to contend with other hunters being in that area? I mean, I guess the point I'm making is anytime there is a possibility that human is involved, you almost have to go to that in the absence of any other kind of evidence, right?
True. But, you know, humans are inherently lazy, and this hillside is very difficult to get down. And the drags that I've had to help my dad with have been hell. Brutal pulls up that hill.
Yeah.
Now, at the base of this hillside, there's a lake down there that has a provincial campground that's not really maintained. And me and my friends like to camp down there. And one time we were out there, everyone was around the campfire at night, and me and one of my other friends wanted to go spearfishing for some carp down in the lake using our flashlights and some homemade spears. And so there's a creek inlet that runs off that same hillside and runs into the lake. Now, while we're out there, just the two of us, we heard some very aggressive growling coming from that creek. It kind of sounded like a wild boar, but we don't have wild boar around this area. So it was an anomalous sound. It didn't sound like anything else we have heard. It gave us a heebie-jeebies, and both of us just kind of looked at each other and were like, well, yeah, let's go back to the fire and get out of here. But that's that same hillside.
Oh, okay.
So I heard on Sasquatch Chronicles, someone described Sasquatch growls the exact same way, saying it sounded like a wild boar. So it's only in retrospect that I put that piece of the puzzle together. You know, it might not have been, but
yeah,
it raised my suspicions.
Was there anything else about that area that, you know, throughout the times? How long have you hunted that area? Okay, so in that, has there ever been anything that you or your dad or you and your buddies, you know, while you were out there, just anything that seems out of place, anything that you've ever come across that you're like, how the hell did that get there? Or, that doesn't look like natural tree fall, or anything in that area that would make you question?
Last year, I ordered a new rifle scope for my gun, and it got to me rather late. And so I had to go sight my rifle in October. And I wasn't working Fridays at the time, so I went out on a Friday morning. I waited until about 11 o'clock to give anybody that might be hunting out there a fair chance before I start shooting. And so I go to a secluded hillside, set up my target about midway so I know the backdrop of where my bullet's going. And, this is about a 200-yard stone throw away from where that trail camera was. And as I'm sighting in my rifle, I shot about 12 rounds through my 30-06. There was a cedar tree on the top of the hill that started to violently shake. Like,
really
whipping back and forth. And, even though I had a gun in my hand, I did not feel comfortable going to the top of the hill and seeing what was doing that.
Were you able to see the top of that tree?
Yes.
Okay.
It was not windy. It was not windy that day. And, I don't see it making sense for an animal to do that. I left that day after shooting like twice more, but I went back this spring to take pictures of that tree. I got curious. I wanted to see what the base of that tree looked like and what was around there. So I went back this spring and I got some good photos of that tree. And while I was there, just north of it, there's a moose bed in some rotten wood. So kind of that broken up tree substrate. And in this moose bed, I found a 14-inch Sasquatch track. Barefoot, really. But since the material was so bad, I couldn't possibly cast it.
Did you take pictures of it?
I tried to. They didn't turn out very well because of the substrate.
Yeah.
But it was rather... I found it encouraging to actually find that track right by that tree.
That's interesting. Yeah, so here's can you give an estimate? What do you think the base of that tree was at say the 5 or 6 feet above the ground? How big a diameter?
It's about a 6 to 8 inch diameter tree, so not super big, but it's still pretty sturdy.
Right.
So if I was to try to shake that tree, I couldn't have moved it the way it was moving. It was definitely an intimidation display. It didn't like me there. But I was wearing hearing protection at the time, so if it was screaming at me, I wouldn't have been able to hear it.
Yeah. That's interesting. Was the tree in pretty clear sight of you?
Yes.
And yet you were not able to see anything.
So at the base of this tree, there's other saplings that, go just above 6.5 feet.
Okay.
And they're rather bushy. So even if I did crest that hill, I wouldn't have been able to see it.
Gotcha.
Standing at the base of that tree. So, it had the perfect camouflage, really.
That's interesting. That would be a little on the scary side for me.
It was a little scary because, when you're shooting a gun, nothing really comes into you while you're shooting. Usually it's the opposite. They run away.
Mm-hmm.
The other experience I've had with Sasquatch, I was camping on another mountain range. So a mountain range across the valley from where this all happened, on the backside of it. And we were up in some subalpine lakes, 2 side by side, and they're separated by a little path through a swamp about 200 yards away from each other. There's a little ranger cabin set up at one of them, and there's a gravel parking lot where you can park your trucks. So we had been out there for a couple days, and we were being really loud, playing music all day long. We had a potato cannon that we were shooting potatoes across the lake. I think we even shot a tiki torch into a tree trunk. So the scene there is we weren't being quiet. And I think on the second or third night, I wanted to call owls during the dusk. So I got everyone to quiet down for a minute, and I started doing a great horned owl call. And I got a response right away. And so I call again, and I get a reply. And then I got another owl from close to that location pipe up as well. And then one on the far end of the lake. And then another on the other side of the lake. And then 2 or 3 from that second lake I told you about. So all in all, there was about 12 owls calling all at one time, which seems anomalous. And then that first one that I was talking to got really excited and kind of broke down into this chimpanzee-like chatter mixed with a kookaburra. So if you can picture that, just that really excited chatter. And, I just thought it was a stupid owl at the time. I hadn't known at that point that Sasquatch mimic owls quite often. Again, it's only in retrospect, looking back at it, that you realize, hey, something was going on there.
I had an experience. I've talked about it several times on the show up in the Huron-Manistee National Forest. And I was on a kayak trip with 2 other guys, and we were sitting around at the end of the day. It was getting late. It was around 10 o'clock. We had a fire going. We were sitting around the campfire having some beers, and all of a sudden we start hearing this owl directly across the river from us. And then there was one that was considerably further behind us. And then there was one that was considerably further up the river from us. And it continued to repeat in this specific pattern. It was always the one across the lake, then the one behind us, then the one ahead of us. And it kept doing it over and over and over and over again. And according to my buddy, I guess barred owls are the type owl that are native to that area. And the sound that owl made was more of a, and, and it just didn't sound right. In fact, the first guy that was facing me, he's the one that first brought it up, saying, man, that doesn't sound right. That sounds like somebody out there trying to sound like an owl. But all 3 of them sounded the same. They were just at different volumes because they were at different distances away from us. But it was unusual. And there were a number of other things that happened that night that lead me to believe that it wasn't an owl.
Same with my situation. About 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, most everyone had gone to bed that night. And there was about 4 of us left around the campfire, just having little heart-to-hearts around the fire, still listening to music. And from behind us, we could hear running on that gravel parking lot coming right at us, and this really guttural growl, just like really quickly. Like by the time we had turned around, we couldn't see anything.
What do you guess? What do you guess the distance was to you?
20 yards.
Really?
It wasn't that far. We talked to everyone in the morning about it, saying, we had this deranged coyote in the camp run across the parking lot. I mean, we went out and looked with flashlights even. We couldn't see anything. But the people in the tents all reported that something had been dragging along the side of their tent.
When you say you heard something run at you, that makes it sound like you were hearing the footsteps, the footfalls, as they were coming to you. So
you could hear the shuffle of the gravel. Yeah,
you could.
Yeah. It was rather intimidating. But again, we just thought it was some deranged coyote or something. But, you know, once you start putting those pieces together of what happened earlier in the night and then what happened there, and all the activity we had been doing in the area, I think we had maybe ticked off a family group, and that was probably the alpha saying, you know, quiet down or get out of here. When we were at the ranger cabin that's over there, we were looking at the logbook, and some people said that they had stuff circling their camps at night. So that also seemed a little bit weird.
It's funny because my son had an experience. He never saw it, so you know he's not willing to say it was a Sasquatch, but he saw eye shine in the evening. He got the side of their A-frame that they were renting slapped or hit by something that shook the side of the A-frame and jiggled the paintings that were on the wall. Also made the dogs go bonkers. But log books, you know, like visitor books, those things are, they tell a tale, because in that A-frame, there was a guest book. And as they were having these experiences, the girl he was with started reading through the guest book. And a few months earlier in the summer, there's an entry that said, really enjoyed our time here, blah, 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 blah. Sasquatch made his presence known. We didn't get to see him, but we knew he was here. And, you know, a couple of pages before that, they were talking about unusual lights that were dancing around over the Tippy Dam. So, you know, people want to tell their stories. So they write the stuff down, you know. And
what better way to do it than anonymously in a cabin logbook?
Yeah.
To your point about eye shine, after I had really gotten, you know, I've always loved the subject of Sasquatch, but I kind of grew out of it for a little while, and then I came back into it. And when I came back into it, it's just been like an obsession. And you often hear eye shine and eye glow referred to as the woo, right? That's not supposed to happen.
I mean, eye shine, no. Eye shine is very much,
but not in a prime.
But the glow, when they start describing it as a glow, especially in the red spectrum of light, people tend to dismiss that and put it in with the woo.
Now, I tried to think of this in a way that would make sense. And I have done some other studies on existing animals, such as owls and other nocturnal animals. And when you put them in the ultraviolet spectrum of color, they glow. They light up in all kinds of different colors that they normally are not to our eyesight. Take a flying squirrel, for instance. They're very mundane looking to us. They're just brown or black, and they only come out at night, so they're very nocturnal. And when you hit them with UV, they turn orange and pink and blue.
Really?
Like, just crazy wild colors. And they use the UV spectrum to see at night in low light conditions. So I got thinking, you know, maybe Sasquatch does the same kind of thing. It's often reported to be mostly nocturnal. So why wouldn't they see like that? And so I delved into it a little deeper. And there's many, many species of animals that will glow in UV.
Okay,
owls,
so UV, ultraviolet.
Correct.
Is that anything like when we were younger, you go to Spencer's Gifts and you buy a black light for a black light poster that would glow?
This is a little more sophisticated.
Okay.
Different wavelength. This is more along the lines of the black lights that forensics will use.
Okay.
So it's not so much the purple, it really lights things up.
Yeah.
The way they're seen. Owls have a very unique way of communicating with each other. So if I take an owl from my town and you stretch out its wing feathers and you light it up with the UV, certain bands of those flight feathers will fluoresce under the ultraviolet. Now, if you take another owl from another region, same species, and you stretch out its wings and look at the same flight feathers, they're going to fluoresce in a different pattern. And that helps them identify where they come from. And, predatory birds like that migrate every winter, so they got to come back to their same region. So it helps them identify who's who and where they go.
Okay. So when you say you spread their wings out and these bands become apparent, is it something that's only happening like on the underneath of the wings, or is it on the outside of the bird as well?
A little bit on the outside, but mostly on the inside.
On the inside.
Yeah. So it's something they see during flight. I'm a little bit of a rock hound as well. And the UV subject got brought up in some of the rock hounding. And there's certain rocks called euperlites that really caught my attention.
Yeah.
And I mean, you probably have them around the Great Lakes there.
Yep. More middle of the state on up. Yeah.
Right. And if you hit these things with ultraviolet, they glow like a burning ember out of a fire. They're amazing. They look fantastic. Some people even get the big ones and turn them into cosmic bowling balls. Now, where this gets involved with Sasquatch is, I think that when they see these rocks, those are the rocks that get gifted to people at gifting sites. They'd be culturally significant to the Sasquatch. If this is true, I can't prove that yet. But if it's true, it takes what we see as a mundane rock, because it looks like any other granite, and makes it amazing. Really bright orange. I mean, even the small ones. I went out to the river last weekend and I got just a bucket full of river rock. Brought it back at night and I took my UV flashlight and, a handful of the rocks will light up. And I got some that are so bright red, it's amazing.
Now, after you remove the light source from them, do they continue to glow, or is it necessary to have that light source on them to get them to do it?
It's necessary to have the light source on them. Yeah. But, you often hear about Sasquatch throwing rocks at people.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you can imagine having one of these little pebble-sized ones that are glowing bright red and you throw it at someone, that's going to look like a tracer bullet to them, if that's how they see it.
Okay, being a rock hound, my son's a geologist, so
right.
He's kind of in the same in the same boat with you. As far as the euperlite rocks themselves, are they geographically locked into a specific area, or could I find them down here in northern Indiana? Are they all over the place? Did they just become euperlites because they were found in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan a long time ago?
I'm not really sure about the euperlites. I think the ones that I am finding right now are called glowadites, which is kind of a dumb name, but many other gemstones will also fluoresce in their own different colors. I have a rough cut ruby that will fluoresce in a totally different pattern.
I got you.
I got some agates here that will glow almost like a neon green, along with the orange and the red. And some of them even go like a violet, purple, blue.
So you're theorizing that, people who put out a handful of highly polished, colorful marbles as a gift, and they get these just mundane, ugly ass rocks in return. That
along with feathers.
That they may be missing the point. And how economical is it to purchase a UV producing light? I mean, can you just
50, $80? It's not that bad.
So if you are in a situation where you're gifting with what you think to be a Sasquatch, it might be worth buying one of those and spreading a little bit of light on what you're being gifted to see if they're interesting.
Yeah, if it's culturally significant to them, that would definitely show up. And I mean, you could even do an experiment where you take, say, 3 or 4 rocks, you got your control, you got the rocks that won't fluoresce, and then you throw in one that will fluoresce. And you leave that at your gift site. And if they take that, just the one that glows, that would show significance. And if you can repeat that experiment, you know, that's a scientific experiment that could be put into action very easily.
Okay, so here's my question for you. For us, in order to view something that fluoresces, we have to hit it with ultraviolet light. An owl or a flying squirrel or any other natural inhabitants to this world, those things don't need the addition of fluorescent light to be able to see it.
They should natively be able to see like that. I think it might also be in combination with infrared even. That would also help you in low light conditions. I mean, we use the infrared for our night cams, but I mean, what if they just have that natively built into their vision? I mean, until we get one, we can't really prove that, but it's something to keep in mind and look at. I think it's very important. Listening to people like Doug Hychek, producer of Monster Quest, he's done some nature documentaries separate from Sasquatch, but I think very significant. He's said that bears and caribou can see in the UV spectrum, and they use this to look at the fluorescence of plant matter, and it will show the protein and sugar contents of the plants that they're eating. So if you've ever watched a bear eat, they'll go from one plant and then walk 20 yards and then eat the next plant, right? Instead of grazing around the one area. Now, what they're seeing is the most bang for their buck food. They're not wasting their energy grazing on plants that aren't full of the nutrients that they need to really pack on that winter fat. So I also think Sasquatch will do the same thing as a big omnivore. They'll be able to see this fluorescence in the plants and only eat the stuff that would give them the energy they need.
Are there any, to your knowledge, are there any other game animals, what we would perceive to be game animals, that fluoresce under UV light? Do, say, deer?
I don't know yet if deer would. Probably the white hairs on them would, for sure. That would show up really bright. So a whitetail, if it's got his flag up, that would fluoresce easy.
So potentially, if Sasquatch is seen in the UV spectrum,
they'd stick out like a sore thumb,
which would make night hunting
really beneficial.
Pretty beneficial, yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
When you're looking at the plants in the forest too, the colors just really pop in all kinds of weird different ways. I went out and did some nighttime investigations around just regular farm plants around here. And corn will come up as blue. Same with grass. So kind of gives a new meaning to the bluegrass. And then looking at alfalfa, very green to our eyesight, but when you hit it with the UV, it turns out very red in the center of the leaves. So that would be showing you the nutritional value of that leaf. Flowers do the same kind of thing, but more so for insects. If you look at a daisy and you hit it with UV, they'll have landing strips that we don't see down the flower petals going towards the pollen. So that's another way that plants communicate with animals, is with UV, something we don't see at all.
So it's like a neon sign saying, "Hey, we're open.
Exactly.
Come eat."
There's a whole hidden world that we just don't see, and we're so caught up with the human condition that we don't think about it. But it's very real, and almost everything uses it. Take a starling, for instance. What do you see when you see a starling?
Just a normal bird.
Yeah, it's black and with a yellow beak, right? Yeah. You hit it with ultraviolet, and a starling turns rainbow. It's got every color on it.
Really?
Yeah, it goes from the most mundane bird to pretty fantastic.
I wonder if I Googled UV photography, if there would be examples of a bunch of this wildlife and natural stuff that has been photographed under UV light to show what you're talking about.
There sure is. I mean, I posted a whole bunch of it to my Instagram.
What's your Instagram?
Chucky_danger. And I've got some good examples of the stuff that I've found personally. Another good plant example is lichen, or old man's beard. When you look at it, it's that dull gray, green, doesn't really look like much, sitting on every branch on a tree.
Yeah.
You hit it with the ultraviolet and it turns bright orange. It's almost like if you could see an ultraviolet without the use of the flashlight, it would be like you were in Avatar world.
Yeah. I almost wonder if any of the colors have any type of an association with, like some frogs in the Amazon have very specific color patterns, and those specific colors mean they're dangerous. So I wonder if there's any kind of correlation like that with what we're talking about, whether or not these animals are seeing things that, because how would they know that something is okay to eat or not?
Right. I mean, the science of UV in animals is so new that there's not a ton of information out there. There's been a couple documentaries that get into the basics of it. There's BBC's Life at Night, and David Attenborough does a good one of Life in Color that shows animals in all kinds of different color spectrums, not just UV, but also in polarized and non-polarized light is also another significant way of communication. But as to Sasquatch specifically, I think it's mostly in the UV spectrum.
Do you think that they're just possibly capable of seeing in that spectrum, or do you think they themselves would fluoresce if they have the ability to see in that spectrum? To me, it would make sense that they would fluoresce in that spectrum as well.
I recently went to a Sasquatch conference in Spokane, Washington. And while I was there, I had the privilege of talking to Dr. Jeff Meldrum about this. And he told me that he had it on good authority that Sasquatch hair will fluoresce. So I found that rather interesting. There's pictures online of chimpanzees that will fluoresce green. So that would be probably around the same ballpark.
Do we fluoresce at all?
Not really.
No.
You'll see a lot of your clothing lint on you. Especially if you wear any kind of like high-vis clothing, that sure pollutes. I mean, that's another factor. If you're a researcher and you're going out at night, that's another thing to consider is the clothing you're wearing, if it fluoresces. Because you might be trying to hide, but...
You might be standing out like a lit-up street sign. Sure.
Absolutely. So that's just another consideration to take into this.
Interesting.
Another is often when you get encounters where a Sasquatch comes up to a homestead, you hear about house slapping.
Yes.
Right? If you take a black light and you go outside and you look at to where that hand slapped the wall, you'll see that handprint.
Really?
That will show up in the UV. The oils of their hands will definitely fluoresce. That will happen with human handprint.
Is that something you found out from Doug Hychuk? Because I know he was making major efforts to, I forget what the name of the oil that's left behind. Sebum. I know he was making a major effort to collect and catalog as many samples of that as he could.
Potential DNA sources.
Yeah. Is that who figured out that it does fluoresce?
I've figured out that the handprint would fluoresce just from looking at my own house. Actually, you see handprints everywhere.
Yeah.
But I mean, if their hands are as oily as ours are, I'm sure that would fluoresce.
Interesting. They seem to be extremely oily.
Yes. In a unique kind of way.
Yeah. And I wonder that's a very strange thing because I wonder why that is. Is that a protective layer? Is that something that helps them out in the environment? Is that something that acts as a sunscreen or part of keeping them warm? It's because, man, when you do see prints that have been left behind, whether they're on a car window or the side of a car or the side of a house, a window on a house, it's a lot. It's a lot. I mean, you don't get that much if you push your face up against a glass. It's interesting stuff.
I imagine it would probably be a bit of an insect repellent and sunscreen. You would imagine.
Yeah.
Another sense that they might have that we don't really consider is electromagnetism. Your whole body produces its own bioelectrics, right? As your heart beats, you create your own aura of electricity around you.
Right.
That is measurable. And animals are really in tune with bioelectrics of anything that's close to them. I recently was watching a documentary and got put on the trail of a different type of camouflage.
Yeah, it acts as a Faraday cage.
That acts as a Faraday cage. Yeah. So it blocks your whole bioelectric signal. How many times have you heard someone say that they were watching a Sasquatch and then immediately the Sasquatch became aware of them? Right? Yeah. I think that might have something to do with it. I mean, if you spend your whole life out in the bush, you're going to be so in tune with everything around you. Other animals, if they're using it, I don't see why they wouldn't as well.
Right.
So if you start wearing this camouflage with a Faraday cage built into it, you're just masking yourself that much further, making it so much more difficult for you to be spotted. I mean, if I was a researcher out in the field at night, I'd definitely want that on.
I got to imagine. I haven't checked prices on that, but I have to imagine that's some significant cost to those.
It's not the cheapest. Probably one of my next big purchases.
So, that property that you hunted with your dad, have you had conversations with him about the things that have happened out there?
My dad's not a believer in Sasquatch. So he hems and haws about it a lot. He had a rather strange occurrence in that same cut block. He had shot a deer late in the season. There was snow on the ground. And he called my mom in a real big panic, which is unusual for my dad, that he was lost. And my dad's been hunting that cut block longer than I've been alive. And, you know, I just found it so unusual for him to say that he was lost. He was saying he was being stalked by a bear. And, you know, the snow's already on the ground, so most of the bears are going to be out hibernating.
Yeah.
So it just didn't make a lot of sense to me. You know, we talk about infrasound and the confusion and muddying that can do.
Right.
You know, maybe he just got too close and one wanted his deer. Started confusing him with infrasound. But again, in that same spot.
You know, it's funny that you bring that up. And it's not funny that it happened to your dad, but you know, the infrasound is something that I firmly believe I experienced. And that's in episode 5. If you want to hear it, go listen to it. It's a long story, but, and when it hit me, it was like a wave. It hit me and all the hair stood up on every inch of my body. And then it kind of dissipated a little bit, and then it came back. And it wasn't quite as strong, and then it dissipated, and then it came back, and it wasn't quite as strong. And it did that 3, 4, maybe 5 times. Each time it came back, it wasn't as strong, and then when it left and it came back again, it wasn't as strong. It was an immediate fight or flight response. Shook me. I thought I heard something really, really loud. I ripped my headphones off my head. It was a loud percussive noise. But my equipment picked up a very, very slight little ooh in the background when it happened. And it took me about a week, and it dawned on me that that's what people are talking about when they got zapped. Because I came to that conclusion because that feeling, as I kept going over it and trying to figure it out and what could have caused it and this and that and the other thing, and it was almost like a jolt of low voltage static electricity, and then it passed, and then it came back, but it wasn't as strong. And when I started thinking of it from an electrical standpoint, that's when it dawned on me, oh, that's what people are talking about when they got zapped. Consequently, Wednesday, just yesterday, during the congressional whistleblower hearings that were played out live on YouTube for the UFO UAP whistleblowers. During the congressional hearing, one of the constituents had brought up talking about effects from people who have experienced UAPs, UFOs. I hate UAPs. Let's call them what they are. They're UFOs. They have been. That's been good enough since 1940s. Let's keep calling them UFOs. That people were experiencing similar effects to the Havana syndrome when coming in contact with these craft. And the Havana syndrome, if you know anything about it, is full on dedicated pinpoint weaponizing of infrasound.
Right. A lot of big animals use infrasound as long distance communication. I mean, elephants will use it to communicate with their herds if they're miles and miles away, let them lead them to water. And, you know, tigers use it as a weapon to freeze their prey right before they jump on them. So, you know, it's not been known in a primate, but it's not out of the realm of possibility.
Right.
And I recently heard that, you know, you bring up the electromagnetism of the infrasound itself. You can use an EMF reader to actually pick up indications of infra and ultrasound. So, you know, your typical ghost hunting tool will work for you in the field looking for Sasquatch at night. If you think you're getting hit with infrasound, it will show up on the meter.
Right. See, and that's an interesting point you bring up, and I'm going to segue into, you know, I had Stacy Brown Jr. from Florida on a couple of months ago, and we talked about, you know, his the tools he uses to go out and look for these things now. And much of what he's doing is pushing the envelope into the paranormal aspects of the type of research tools they're using. They're using EMF, they're using voice recorders, they're using, you know, at times even mind-altering drugs. But I had a conversation with Archbishop Christina Rake out of Chicago. And it was a conversation about how all this stuff is not so ununique to themselves. When you talk about UFO experiencers, or you talk about people who have had experiences in haunted houses, or you talk about people who've had experiences out in the woods with perceived to be Sasquatch. When you're in a haunted house, what do you hear? You hear knocking on the walls, right? What do people hear out in the woods when it comes to Bigfoot? And thinking that it's communication, they hear tree knocks. And I don't know of anybody that's ever, excuse me, I don't know of anybody that has ever seen or reported seen or captured on video or in photograph of a Sasquatch standing there with a very large piece of wood smacking it against a tree. What if that noise is a byproduct of them being within our perception?
I mean, that's quite possible. I mean, you know, nothing's off the table until we prove it.
You know, when you're in a haunted house and you hear knocks on the wall, is that a ghost knocking? Or is that a part of them coming into our perception? Is that an after effect of them entering our perceivable vision and hearing? You know, orbs, light orbs, little lights in the woods. You see, I literally had an orb manifest in front of me in a graveyard, doing a kind of an impromptu ghost investigation with my kids, say 10, 12 years ago.
I'm really glad you brought up the orbs, and I've got a theory with those as well. You know, when you describe an orb, you talk about it being a ball of light that doesn't really emit light around it too far.
Right.
Right?
It's not a source of light that's illuminating everything around it. It's just self-illuminated.
Right. That is very much the same way that UV light will act.
Oh,
so
really?
When you turn on your UV flashlight, you don't see it light up the whole area. You only see it like directly in front of the beam. So
interesting.
I have a theory that those orbs are also in the UV spectrum. I mean, I don't know if anyone's gotten close enough to an orb to see if it like illuminates the foliage around it.
Mm-hmm. But then how would we as humans who cannot see in the UV spectrum, how would we be able to witness those, as so many people do?
It's the same way as like when I turn on my flashlight. I can
So
see
you're saying they're not made of ultraviolet light; they are producing an ultraviolet light.
Right.
Okay.
Right. I think they're producing it.
That's interesting.
So it'd be just the same as like if I was walking around in the forest with my UV flashlight on. You can't see me, but you see my flashlight moving around. Right?
Yeah. That's an interesting thought.
It's the only way I can really make sense of what an orb would be. The way it doesn't illuminate the surrounding area like a normal light would.
Yeah, hearing Ron Moorhead talk about his experiences with the lights in the Sierras was a very interesting. Getting to see him talk about it live versus what I've heard that's been recorded. There's a little bit more to it than what I've come across. Probably the oddest experience was he talks about like what looked like the blade of a lightsaber, basically, kind of just under some kind of intelligent control, but it was, roughly 3 feet long and, a couple inches in diameter, and it just moved in between the trees and stayed at a level height and just kind of guided its way through the trees around them. But they also talked about the lights off in the distance. Right. So
even Bob Gimlin, he told a story about when he was in the Okanagan Valley here in my province, just north of me, just horseback riding along the lakeside, and he saw the orbs there as well. But yeah, that's not something you hear about because everybody wants to talk about the patty film.
Yeah.
But when he tells a story about horseback riding in my local area, I kind of just took that one to heart.
Yeah. Well, interesting stuff, man. Have you garnered any additional interest in what you've been looking into? I mean, do you have people that are kind of wanting to jump on the bandwagon with you and try to look at this stuff in a little more scientific light?
I have, yes. I recently did another interview with the Nicola Valley Bigfoot podcast, local Sasquatch podcast to me. And since then, I've already had researchers contact me and ask for additional information, wanting to get out in the field together. I've also been reached out by other podcasts as well to do other interviews. So, I mean, it's a budding science, and it's fairly new and undeveloped and not really put into place with Sasquatch research. So I think it's an invaluable asset to at least try. I mean, if it doesn't pan out, it doesn't pan out. But I think the possibilities are significant.
Yeah, I encourage anybody who is thinking outside the envelope to see where it goes. If you run into dead end after dead end after dead end, then yeah, maybe it was a bad idea. Maybe it didn't pan out. But just like Stacy Brown with using some of the paranormal tools that most ghost adventure or ghost investigators use in the interest of trying to help find Sasquatch. Why not? I mean, if you garner some results from it, then that's just another piece of the puzzle.
Well, sure. I think when we do Sasquatch research, so often we're focused on just that missing piece of the puzzle, and we don't pay attention to the rest of the pieces in the box. So
I agree, and I think the issue with that is I think some of the great voices, some of the loudest voices in the Sasquatch arena, as far as being looked at as a I won't call him an expert, but as an educated, like Jeff Meldrum, like Cliff Barrickman, and there's others. But they all, and I've talked about this before, they all lean on the crutch of science. There's things that they will not discuss because it has no basis, or they have no way to cross-reference it to something that is solidly in science. Like any of the aspects of the woo. They won't entertain it. You talk to them personally off air, and they'll talk to you about it, and they're it's like, yeah, it's weird, and there's a lot of people that talk about it, so it's got to be something to it. But we can't bring it up and have any kind of a formal conversation about it because we have no idea what it is or how it's happening. So, they stick to the things that they know. That's something's leaving footprints in the woods. We can find that footprint. We can cast it. We can take 3D models of it. We can look at the anatomical structure of it. We can tell how the foot bends. We can tell that it needs to be that size and it needs to bend where it does because of the weight and the size of these things, and that's all well and good, but it's the same thing over and over and over again. You can go to a Bigfoot conference on the West Coast, smack dab here in the Midwest. You can go one out on the East Coast, and the conversation is the same because there are not that many people who are pushing the envelope and looking at other aspects to these things. And unfortunately, when they do and they try to air their ideas, a lot of times they're shut down because there's nobody that wants to side with them to show that there is a basis in science for it. So,
right. I think the natural studies of this UV actually being studied by significant scientists, putting out university studies, there is the scientific background for this UV. I think if you can understand Sasquatch's environment as well as it does, you'll start to understand behavior and tendencies maybe, or even cultural significance. Like maybe there's something that fluoresces on these teepee structures. I don't know. But
well, wouldn't that be interesting? Wouldn't that be nuts if you went out and you found a structure and hit it with UV light, and all of a sudden there was this like really obvious glyph that was something that would just jump out at you? That would be crazy.
Well, I think even some of this stuff, like when you say glyphs, it the UV thing applies to even archaeology. There's artifacts from a long, long time ago coming out of Tula Hidalgo, Mexico, that when you hit them with the UV light, writing pops up that you don't see.
Really?
It's fantastic. These artifacts are a little bit controversial. The Mexican Antiquities Minister won't acknowledge them as being real because they depict not only gray aliens, but also Egyptian and Sumerian motif. So this is King Montezuma's kingdom, and they're digging up these artifacts all the time. And out of that specific region in Tula Hidalgo, the artifacts will fluoresce and phosphoresce. So like you were saying earlier, when you take the light away, they stay glowed for a few seconds. Mm-hmm. But, even that, like adding UV to archaeological studies could be very significant in the new findings that we never even imagined.
Wow. That's very interesting. Very, very interesting. What else you got for us?
I've got some other experiences in life. I've seen a UFO since we talked about the UAP commission. That was a good 15-minute sighting.
Really?
Yeah. I was out on a back deck watching a meteor shower in August, and I was out there with an ex-girlfriend and my little brother, and I saw what looked to be a satellite going across the sky. So I pointed it out, and oh yeah, there's a satellite. You know, this is like back in 2009 when we didn't have as many up there. And as we're watching it, another one starts coming from the opposite direction, and they almost look like they would collide. And as we're watching it, the first one hung a Yui and started following the other one. Like, whoa, satellites don't switch direction and start following other satellites. And at that moment, they both stopped and they dropped in the atmosphere. So they came really low in the sky. And it looked like an upside down triangle. So you got the 2 points up top and the 1 point down below of these colored lights that would shift colors almost like a mood light. So, you know, just kind of drifting from one color to the next in a clockwise fashion. And they would dart from horizon to horizon, mountaintop to mountaintop, back, forth, back, forth, back, forth. Stop, do a blinking display. And then the second one kind of went away from me at an angle and just disappeared in the high orbit, just like got smaller, and then blip, gone.
Were you able to get any video of that, or?
I tried. At the time, my phone was, I think, the chocolate flip, and that was like trying to film with a potato.
I've never heard of the chocolate flip. That must be a Canadian terminology.
It was like one of the LG flip phones back in the day.
Yeah. So the orientation to the Earth, the triangular shape, the way you were describing it makes it sound like the orientation was not that it was on a level plane, but the lower point was pointed towards the Earth and the other two went up.
Well, I actually did see the craft much closer than that. So that triangular display was just on the side of the ship. After that first one disappeared, the second, or the first one stuck around, second one disappeared. It did the light display a few more times, just doing this aerial dance in the sky. Back, forth, back, forth. This is going to sound weird, but it displayed a color that does not exist as of yet. I don't know how to describe it, because how do you describe a color that doesn't exist? And after it did this, it was like the first ship, and it went high atmosphere and went smaller, and then disappeared. But then almost immediately came right back, and it went right into a very low atmosphere cloud that was sitting right above town. And when it was in the cloud, you could see the full size of the ship. It was like a single level rancher house, but it was a saucer.
Oh,
but yeah.
Are you guys having an extraordinary amount of sightings up in Canada? And the reason I ask is because a guy that I really have enjoyed his content, Justin Terpinski, from Mountain Beast Mysteries out of Canada. He's been doing this I've probably been watching him for at least 2.5 years. I think he was doing it for longer than that. He'd put out these shorts about him being out in the woods of Canada looking for Bigfoot, and it was always a very good. He never found much, it was just him out there doing everything he could to try to find some evidence or eventually run into one, I guess. And then all of a sudden, about 6 months ago, he just kind of flipped, and I think he moved to a new apartment building and started spending a lot of time out on his balcony and looking up at the sky, and he's been getting just insane amounts of video of these bizarre things going on in the skies above Canada.
Wow. Do you know what region of Canada?
I want to say Quebec, but I can't tell you for sure. I know he mentions it in his one of his latest videos. I know he mentions where he's at. I'm not familiar with Canada at all, to be honest, so I don't know what the major cities are. Maybe something around Edmonton?
Edmonton's in Alberta.
Alberta.
Okay.
I know at least in his earlier videos, I know he was living in Alberta. He may have moved, though. It's worth checking out. It's Mountain Beast Mysteries is the name of the YouTube channel, and it would be, I mean, he's got these things that are darting around the sky. He's got them that are going into clouds, like what you mentioned, and when they are in the clouds, the light patterns that show up inside the clouds are different from what the object actually looked like when it was outside of the cloud. So really, I mean, kind of very similar to what you're explaining here. So
very significantly different. I had a bit more corroboration on that sighting. Last year I was sitting in a cut block, just bored hunting, and I came across this website called mapsquatch.com, and it's kind of like a sighting report website that tracks all kinds of things: Sasquatch sightings, UFO encounters, ghost sightings, dogman, all kinds of things. So I went over my town, and I just was curious to see what other people were seeing. And as I scroll down through the list, it's about 8 or 9 different UFO encounters. And I come across one from that same night of people that saw the initial 5 minutes with the first 2 crafts when they were dancing together.
Yeah.
They saw the same thing, and then after the second one went and disappeared, they lost sight of the other one and didn't see the additional 10 minutes. But, you know, it was just nice to have separate corroboration from a different point of view in town, seeing the same thing.
What is the perception up where you're at as far as the existence of Bigfoot? Is it, you know, like here in the States, there seems to be, you know, a lot of people who are really into it and believe it, but there are a ton of people that are just like, you're nuts, man. You know, they want to roll their eyes at you and make fun of you. Is it the same up there? And, you know, with the recent, over the past couple of years, with the slow disclosure that we're having about the UFOs and everything, you know, there's still people that are just like, nah, this is crazy, this is nuts. But it's like they're actually talking about this in an official capacity now. You know, I mean, you know.
Well, British Columbia is, you know, world famous for Sasquatch sightings already.
Right.
You know, out in Harrison Hot Springs, we have a world-renowned Bigfoot festival that happens there. There's even a Sasquatch provincial park where the whole area is named after Sasquatch.
Really?
And there's huge statues everywhere. That's more towards the coast. But as long as you're not in like a major city, Sasquatch is pretty well received. If you're talking to someone that lives in the city, not so much.
So there's still a big separation there.
There is still a big separation, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of tough. I mean, like I said, I was in Windsor at one point in the early 90s. We crossed over to go to one of the casinos, but that's been the extent of, you know. But when you look at a map or you look at Google Earth, when you start getting into the British Columbia area and that, I mean, there's a lot of green. There's a lot of area that doesn't have cities. So I would think that it would be a pervasive thought that these things, it's not a myth.
Some places if you talk about Sasquatch, it's like, why are you bringing that up? Everyone already knows about it.
Really, that matter of fact, huh?
Oh yeah, so some of the small towns, they have activity so often that they just scoff at you if you try to bring it up, like you're talking about the coyote you just saw in the farmyard.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a significant part of British Columbia. I don't understand why this is not a recognized species yet because of all this.
Yeah.
I mean, with all the evidence that everyone's already brought forward and, how many witness testimonies, if only 1% of that is true, that's enough.
Yeah.
And,
if only one of them is true, it's enough.
Right. And, that's enough to have an open and shut case on a murder trial, right?
Right.
So I don't see why they're not recognizing Sasquatch as being a legitimate species.
What are your thoughts on why the huge pushback that they don't exist? If they do come out and say, yes, Sasquatch exists, what do you see? What's the harm in it? What happens to us? What happens to industry? What happens to camping? What happens to forestry? What happens to any number of things that would be associated with ending up having to provide a space for these people, these things, people, I think they're a people, to live out their lives uninterrupted by us?
I think it probably has something to do with how human they are. They come across as very human, and often in descriptions, the face is incredibly human. I mean, you do get the cases where they look a lot more like a gorilla or a chimpanzee.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, the morphology of their foot and their hand is very similar to us. There is slight differences to allow for different adaptation. So they're not full human, but they're very human-like. If we took away all our technology and we lived out in the forest just the same as them, we would probably look similar and have similar abilities to them. I think we've relied on technology for eons, and it's dulled our senses to the point where we don't perceive stuff like UV light, and we don't pick up on magnetism like other animals and plants do. If we took all of that away and were living like cavemen,
mm-hmm.
we would probably be very much the same.
Well, I agree with you 100%. I think, we're people argue that we have evolved into a higher species. I think we have de-evolved into something that is considerably less than the attributes that we had, say, 10, 12, 14, 15,000 years ago. I think back in those days, when we were sleeping around a fire ring and having to sleep with one eye open to make sure that a predator that's coming out of the wood line doesn't come and get our females or our offspring or our food. I think, when people talk about having a sixth sense, I think those things were probably much more prevalent back then. I think we had our sixth sense. I think we had much more acute intuitions. I think our gut probably served us a lot better. Hey, this doesn't feel right. We need to get out of here. You weren't afforded the opportunity to ignore those kind of signs. And,
right.
You start putting walls up around you and start putting windows in, and you put doors that lock and windows that you can shut and a roof over your head so you don't have to worry about the rain, and, brick walls so you don't have to worry about forest fires and all kinds of stuff like that. It eliminates the need for your body to constantly be aware, situationally aware. We're just perfectly oblivious, as long as our alarm goes off in the morning and there's coffee brewing, before we get in the car to drive to work, that's all we're really worried about. That's not to say in some areas that, there's higher crime rates and stuff like that, and people have to worry about getting their houses broken into. That's not what I'm getting at. But yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think we were probably much more in lines with natural creatures.
Well, sure. If we were made on this earth to be part of Earth, you think we would blend in with everything else. But if you look at us right now, we're the odd one out. We don't pick up on.
We are the one thing.
On a lot of things.
We are the one thing does not look like it belongs here.
But I think at one point in time we did have these abilities, and it was natural, and then we just kind of adapted out of it because of our comfort level. We opted for tools and fire, and once you have a firelight going every nighttime in your house, you have no need for the night vision.
Yeah.
So, there goes your UV, there goes maybe infrared. So as other animals use that all the time, we grew out of it. Now we need tools to see the same thing and relearn what was probably well known in the past.
Yeah, I agree. Charles, it's been a great conversation with you, man. I appreciate you taking the time to do this. Very interesting stuff. Like I said, I'm sure that there's going to be some people that listen to this, whether they be weekend warriors or something a little more akin to a researcher, who may be interested in getting a hold of you. How would they do that? Probably through your Instagram?
Yeah, Instagram would probably be the easiest way to do it. So that again is Chucky_danger, and should pop up. And yeah, I got lots of examples of different photos of plants and rocks and animals that I've posted that I've took off the internet, book resources, documentaries that I can help point you in the right direction.
All right, Chucky_danger. Thanks so much for being with us tonight. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Eric.
Good night.